The Battle of Algiers wasn't just a war film, it was a Molotov cocktail thrown into the heart of cinema. A movie so brutally realistic that the Pentagon used it to train soldiers, terrorists studied it as a manual, France banned it for 5 years, and directors are still trying to figure out how Gillo Pontecorvo pulled it off. From the fake newsreel footage so convincing they had to add disclaimers, to the Pentagon screening that sparked outrage in 2003, to the bizarre fact it's the only film ever nominated for Oscars in 2 different years, here are 20 weird facts about the Battle of Algiers. But first, the bonus fact at the end. The one thing about this film's legacy that will make you question everything you think you know about how movies shape real-world violence. Let's get into it. Number 20. The Pentagon screened it to learn how to fight in Iraq. In August 2003, just months after invading Iraq, the Pentagon's Directorate for Special Operations and Low-Intensity Conflict held a special screening of The Battle of Algiers. The flyer distributed to military officers and civilian experts read, "How to win a battle against terrorism and lose the war of ideas. Children shoot soldiers at point-blank range. Women plant bombs in cafes. Soon the entire Arab population builds to a mad fervor." Sound familiar? The French have a plan. It succeeds tactically, but fails strategically. To understand why, come to a rare showing of this film. The irony was staggering. Pontecorvo made the film as an anti-colonial statement, showing how violence begets more violence. The Pentagon watched it as a counterinsurgency instruction manual. They saw the French tactics and thought, how do we do this better? When the film's entire thesis was, this approach destroys you politically even if you win militarily. The screening attracted about 40 officers and experts, and the discussion reportedly focused on whether torture would be effective in Iraq. Over a decade later, after widespread use of enhanced interrogation at Abu Ghraib and beyond, the Iraq insurgency evolved into ISIS. Turns out the answer to how useful is torture was exactly what the film said, not very. The lesson was there. They just refused to learn it. Number 19. It was studied as a training manual by the Black Panthers. The Battle of Algiers achieved something no other political film has managed. It became required viewing for both revolutionaries and the regimes trying to crush them. The Black Panthers analyzed the urban guerrilla tactics, how to move weapons through checkpoints, how to organize cells, how to weaponize the oppressed population's anger. The IRA studied the French counterinsurgency methods and the FLN's responses. The Palestine Liberation Organization reportedly used sequences as operational guides. But here's where it gets truly dark. Argentine military intelligence units during their dirty war also screened the film, learning torture and disappearance techniques from the French paratroopers. The same tactics, just flipped depending on which side you supported. Military juntas in Chile and Brazil followed suit. Even Al-Qaeda may have studied it, according to counterterrorism experts. By the 2000s, West Point and the Naval War College had made it a fixture in counterinsurgency courses. The film's influence is so pervasive that when Christopher Nolan cited it as inspiration for The Dark Knight Rises and Dunkirk, he was tapping into a lineage that includes some of history's most brutal actors. Pontecorvo created a Rorschach test. Everyone who watches sees validation for their side. That's either proof of his balanced approach or evidence that depicting violence, no matter how critically, inevitably serves as an instruction. Number 18, France banned it for 5 years. The Battle of Algiers premiered at the Venice Film Festival in August 1966 and won the Golden Lion. The French delegation refused to attend the screening, walking out in protest. France immediately banned theatrical distribution. For 5 years, French citizens couldn't legally see the film that depicted their country's colonial brutality. When distributors finally secured release in 1971, the reception was explosive. Literally, right-wing extremists planted bombs or made bomb threats at theaters showing the film, protests erupted, screenings were canceled, the film disappeared again. It wasn't widely shown in France until the early 1980s and even then faced regular disruptions. French television wouldn't broadcast it until 2004. The official reason for the ban was that it could incite violence or disturb public order. The real reason? It forced France to confront truths they had spent years burying. That French paratroopers routinely tortured prisoners. That over 350,000 died in the war. That the Harkis were slaughtered by the tens of thousands after independence and France did nothing. Two French generals, Paul Ocereses and Jacques Massou, didn't admit to systematic torture until 2001. The Battle of Algiers told those truths in 1966. France tried to suppress it. The film won. Number 17, Paul Newman was supposed to star. The original script was completely different. Pontecorvo and screenwriter Franco Salinas envisioned a film called Para. A French paratrooper turned journalist who arrives in Algeria, witnesses the war's horrors, and undergoes a moral awakening. They wanted Paul Newman for the lead. Big star, international appeal, guaranteed financing. The script was, in the words of film scholar Peter Matthews, a story about Newman's inner turmoil and only secondarily relates the far more ponderable misery of the Algerian people. Classic white savior narrative. Enter Salah Bazi, an FLN representative in exile, and Saadi Yacef, an actual FLN military commander. They approached Pontecorvo with their own vision. Tell the Algerian story from Algerian perspectives with Algerian faces. No American movie star having epiphanies while brown people suffer photogenically in the background. Yacef handed Pontecorvo his own script based on his memoir written in prison, but that script was too propagandistic. Pontecorvo rejected it as sickeningly propagandistic, so they negotiated. Pontecorvo got total artistic control. Yacef got financing from the Algerian government and input on authenticity. Newman was out. The result? A film that couldn't exist without rejecting both Hollywood's colonial gaze and revolutionary propaganda. Had Newman starred, we would have a forgotten message movie. Instead, we got a masterpiece. Sometimes the best creative decision is killing your first idea. Number 16. The lead actor was spotted in a marketplace. Brahim Hajjaj wasn't looking for a film career when Pontecorvo spotted him. He was a 27-year-old, nobody selling goods in an Algerian marketplace, but something about his face caught Pontecorvo's eye. This was someone who had lived through colonialism, who understood poverty and rage without needing acting classes. Pontecorvo cast him on the spot as Ali Lapointe, the film's emotional center. Hajjaj had never acted before. He never would again. A Man Escaped used this same approach, but Bresson made a religion of it. Pontecorvo made it practical. He didn't want performances, he wanted presence. Hajjaj brings an intensity to Ali that no trained actor could manufacture. You believe this man would plant bombs because you believe he has been pushed beyond all other options. Italian neorealism pioneered this technique, but the Battle of Algiers perfected it for political cinema. The film employed around 150 non-professional actors, only one professional, Jean Martin, as Colonel Mathieu. Everyone else was Algerian. Most had lived through the actual Battle of Algiers, and many had scars to prove it. When the crowd scenes erupt with thousands of extras ululating and chanting, that's not choreography. That's memory. Number 15. Jean Martin was the only professional actor. Here's the cosmic irony. The only trained actor in the Battle of Algiers was Jean Martin, cast as a cold, methodical French Colonel Mathieu who oversees systematic torture. And Martin had been blacklisted in France for signing the Manifesto of the 121. His career had been destroyed for opposing the very military actions his character commands. Martin brought something crucial to the role, an understanding that Mathieu isn't a cartoon villain. He's educated, cultured, even occasionally sympathetic in his brutal logic. When Mathieu calmly explains that torture is necessary to dismantle the FLN network, he's not lying. He's correct, within the limited tactical framework he operates in. Screenwriter Franco Salinas said, Mathieu is elegant and cultured, because Western civilization is neither inelegant nor uncultured. The horror isn't that colonizers are monsters, it's that they're intelligent, reasonable people who have convinced themselves that atrocities serve a greater good. Martin understood this because he had watched his own country fall into that delusion. Casting him was Pontecorvo's most subversive move. The man France punished for moral clarity now embodied France's moral bankruptcy. Martin's performance is so nuanced that military organizations still use it to teach the seductive logic of enhanced interrogation. He makes evil sound rational. That's why he's dangerous. Number 14. Not one frame of newsreel footage. The opening credits of the Battle of Algiers include an unusual statement. Not 1 foot of newsreel or documentary film has been used. They had to add this because audiences thought they were watching real documentary footage mixed with dramatic recreations. They weren't. Every single frame was staged by Pontecorvo and cinematographer Marcello Gatti. They achieved this impossible realism through obsessive attention to technique, shooting in grainy black and white, using handheld cameras that wobbled and zoomed frantically, employing natural lighting, creating intentional imperfections in the negative through chemical processing, and most importantly, filming on the actual locations where events occurred. The Casbah sequences were shot in the real Casbah. The prison scenes used actual prison locations. The crowd riots employed thousands of real Algerians who had participated in similar demonstrations. Pontecorvo also used multiple cameras simultaneously to capture chaos from different angles. He studied 1960s cinema verite documentaries obsessively. When you watch the French paratroopers dragging prisoners through streets or FLN members being tortured, the camera behaves exactly like a news cameraman would. Shaky, reactive, sometimes losing focus, desperately trying to capture everything. Getty's cinematography won no awards, but it's the foundation of everything that works. Without that documentary aesthetic, the film becomes just another war movie. With it, it becomes historical testimony. Number 13. Pontecorvo used Kubrick-style repetition. Pontecorvo's directing method was brutal. Like Stanley Kubrick and Robert Bresson before him, he believed authenticity required breaking down actors until their performances collapsed into something raw and unrehearsed. He would shoot the same scene 20, sometimes 30 times, insisting on endless repetition until his cast was physically and emotionally exhausted. But unlike Kubrick's perfectionism or Bresson's spiritual discipline, Pontecorvo had a specific goal. He wanted his actors to look battle-worn, fatigued, pushed beyond their limits. You can't fake that exhaustion. You have to create it. The women preparing to plant bombs in the cafe sequence shot over and over until their nervous energy became genuine anxiety. The torture scenes repeated until everyone on set felt the physical disgust. The crowd riots, multiple cameras, multiple takes, chalk marks on pavements to direct thousands of extras, Pontecorvo screaming instructions through megaphones. His method was controversial even among his crew, but when you watch the final scenes, the faces you see aren't acting. They're enduring. That's what Pontecorvo demanded, not performance, endurance. The toll on his cast was significant. Many never worked in film again, traumatized by the intensity of recreating events some had actually lived through. But the authenticity is undeniable. You're not watching a movie, you're watching memory. Number 12. Saadi Yacef wrote his memoir in prison. Saadi Yacef wasn't just technical advisor on the Battle of Algiers, he was El Hadi Jafar, playing a thinly disguised version of himself, and his path to the film is insane. Born in 1928 to illiterate Berber parents, he started as an apprentice baker. By 1956, at 28, he was the FLN's military chief for Algiers, commanding urban guerrilla operations, including bombings that killed dozens. The French captured him in September 1957 and sentenced him to death. While awaiting execution, Yacef dictated his memoir, Souvenir de la Bataille d'Alger, to help boost FLN morale. It was published in 1962. Then something extraordinary happened. Charles de Gaulle pardoned him. After Algerian independence, Yacef founded Casbah Films and approached multiple directors about adapting his book. Francesco Rosi and Luchino Visconti both turned him down before Pontecorvo accepted. Yacef insisted on playing himself, partly for authenticity, partly to monitor the production. He was protective of his legacy and worried about European exploitation. The result is one of cinema's strangest performances, a real military commander reenacting his own terrorist operations on the locations where they occurred, directed by an Italian communist, financed by the Algerian government, and sold to international audiences as art. Yacef served in Algeria's Council of the Nation until his death in 2021 at 93. In a 2007 interview, he admitted FLN actions that killed women and children, justifying them as necessary for independence. Then he critiqued post-independence FLN rule for enabling Islamic extremism. Through mismanagement, we created a monster. The man, the character, the legend, impossible to separate. Number 11, it's the only film ever nominated for Oscars in 2 different years. The Battle of Algiers premiered in Venice in August 1966. It was nominated for Best Foreign Language Film at the 1967 Oscars. It didn't win, but the film had such a slow, strange rollout that under old Academy rules, it became eligible again for the 1969 ceremony. This time it received 2 nominations, Best Director and Best Original Screenplay. It didn't win those either, but the Academy record stands. The Battle of Algiers is the only film in Oscar history nominated in non-consecutive years. The French were furious both times. In 1967, the French film industry protested the nomination. In 1969, they protested again. Meanwhile, the film was still banned in France. The absurdity? Hollywood recognized it twice, but the country it depicted refused to let citizens see it. This bizarre eligibility issue happened because international films had different qualifying windows and the Academy hadn't anticipated a movie taking 2 years to reach all markets. They changed the rules afterward. But the Battle of Algiers had already exploited the loophole. 3 nominations, 0 wins, but eternal influence. Sometimes losing is more important than winning. Number 10, Ennio Morricone composed the score, the haunting military drum that pulses through the Battle of Algiers, the indigenous Algerian rhythms during the women's preparation sequences, the sparse use of melody. This is Ennio Morricone at his most restrained. But the collaboration was a battlefield. Pontecorvo fancied himself a composer and wrote music for the film. But Italian regulations required melodized composers to work with another credited composer. So Pontecorvo called his friend Morricone, who had recently broken through with Sergio Leone's westerns. They had constant disagreements. Morricone later recalled Pontecorvo arriving at his apartment humming a melody he wanted in the film. Morricone asked him to wait, having conceived something different. They argued. Eventually, they compromised, co-crediting the score. The result is revolutionary. Instead of traditional orchestral swells, Pontecorvo and Morricone use sound design as music. Gunfire, helicopters, and truck engines represent French power. Bomb blasts, ululation, wailing, and indigenous drumming represent Algerian resistance. Actual music appears rarely. The solo military drum throughout, played by famous Italian percussionist Pierino Munari, functions as both heartbeat and death march. It's minimalist, almost avant-garde, totally unlike Morricone's usual maximalist approach. Years later, Morricone said, working with Pontecorvo taught him restraint. The score influenced everyone from Hans Zimmer to Trent Reznor. But at the time, it was just 2 stubborn Italians fighting over whether war needed a soundtrack. Number 9, Christopher Nolan cited it as direct inspiration for both Dunkirk and The Dark Knight Rises. Christopher Nolan doesn't hide his influences, he lists them in interviews and screens them for his crews. For Dunkirk, Nolan showed his team 11 films, only 2 of which were war movies. The Battle of Algiers was one. Why? Because Pontecorvo understood that suspense comes from a process, not plot. You show how things happen, moment by moment, and tension builds organically. Dunkirk adopted the same approach. Minimal dialogue, environmental sound as score, fragmented timeline, focus on physical action over psychology. Even the documentary-style cinematography echoes Gaudi's work. For The Dark Knight Rises, Nolan studied the Battle of Algiers urban warfare sequences. Bane's takeover of Gotham directly references the film's depiction of insurgency tactics. Nolan has said he's drawn to how the film makes you understand both sides without endorsing either. That moral complexity without moral relativism is rare in cinema. It's also evident in Dunkirk's approach to showing French and British forces, and in Dark Knight's exploration of Batman's surveillance overreach versus Joker's chaos. The Battle of Algiers created a template. You can make political films about violence that refuse to simplify, that honor craft and artistry, that trust audiences to think. Nolan follows that template religiously. So do the Safdie brothers, Paul Greengrass, Catherine Bigelow, and others. They're all students of Pontecorvo, whether they acknowledge it or not. Number 8, the film shows actual torture techniques. The Battle of Algiers doesn't shy away from depicting French torture methods, waterboarding, electroshock, beatings, stress positions, psychological intimidation. These weren't invented for the movie. These were documented techniques used by French paratroopers under General Jacques Massu's command. Pontecorvo showed them matter-of-factly, not gratuitously, but not sanitized either. The effect is chilling because Colonel Mathieu explains the logic. Should we remain in Algeria? If you answer yes, then you must accept all the necessary consequences. The torture works. The FLN network collapses. France wins the Battle of Algiers and loses the war. After the Pentagon screening in 2003 and the subsequent Abu Ghraib scandal, counterterrorism experts began using the film differently. Not as instruction, but as warning. West Point now pairs screenings with discussions about why the French tactics failed politically and morally. The film explicitly shows that torture generates false intelligence, hardens resistance, and destroys the legitimacy of the regime using it. Colonel Mathieu wins every tactical engagement and loses the strategic war. American military doctrine now includes concepts drawn from studying this film: the importance of winning hearts and minds, the futility of purely military solutions to political problems, the danger of becoming what you're fighting against. In 2015, historian Alfred McCoy traced American torture doctrine from CYA manuals through Vietnam, Central America in the 1980s, and finally to Iraq and Afghanistan. The film doesn't argue torture is immoral, it argues it's ineffective. That's a harder case to ignore. Number 7, every French officer in the film is a composite. Colonel Mathieu seems like a specific person. He's not. He's a composite of multiple French counterinsurgency officers, especially General Jacques Massu and Colonel Marcel Bigard, with elements of Colonel Roger Trinquier. Pontecorvo and Solinas deliberately fictionalized because the real officers were still alive and litigious. Massu in particular had threatened legal action against anything depicting his role accurately, so they created Mathieu. Even the dialogue comes from multiple sources. Mathieu's famous press conference explaining torture, adapted from actual statements by Massu and others, just reworded enough to avoid lawsuits. His calm, logical justifications for extreme measures, drawn from counterinsurgency manuals written by the real officers. The irony, Massu and Bigard later admitted everything. In 2000, General Paul Osarases published Services Spéciaux, Algérie, 1955 to 1957, a memoir confirming systematic torture and extrajudicial executions. In 2001, Massu expressed regret about the methods, saying torture wasn't necessary, but for decades they denied it all while threatening anyone who suggested otherwise. Pontecorvo's solution allowed him to tell the truth while maintaining legal protection. It also universalized the critique. Mathieu isn't one bad officer. He's a system. The banality of his evil is the point. Change his name, give him Massu's logic and Bigard's tactics and Trinquier's theories, and suddenly he's not an anomaly. He's colonialism's inevitable product. That's more damning than any specific accusation could be. Number 6, the 3 women bombers were based on real people. The most harrowing sequence in the Battle of Algiers: 3 young Algerian women transform themselves to pass as European, then plant bombs in a cafe, an Air France office, and a dance hall. The scene is excruciating. Pontecorvo shows the women's nervous preparation, their passage through checkpoints where French soldiers flirt with them, and then, devastatingly, extended shots of the bomb targets. A teenager sipping soda at the bar. A couple dancing. Ordinary people who will be dead in minutes. The women leave. The bombs explode. 23 people died in the real attacks. The sequence is based on actual 1956 bombings carried out by FLN militants Zora Drif, Jamila Bouhired, and Hasiba Ben Bouali. All 3 survived the war. Drif and Bouhired attended screenings of the film. They watched actresses reenact their own terrorist attacks. In Criterion Collection interviews, Drif speaks about the events calmly, explaining the military logic. The French had bombed the Kasbah, killing Algerian civilians, so the FLN responded in kind. Bouhired, who was captured and tortured, became an international cause célèbre when her death sentence sparked protests. She's still alive today. Watching these women discuss the bombings they committed is profoundly unsettling. Pontecorvo doesn't judge them in the film. He just shows their actions and the consequences. That moral restraint is why both revolutionaries and their victims can watch and see themselves. It's also why the film remains dangerous. It doesn't tell you what to think about political violence. It forces you to decide. Number 5, Pontecorvo fled fascist Italy as a Jewish teen. Gillo Pontecorvo wasn't a detached observer chronicling distant conflicts. He lived this shit. Born in 1919 to a wealthy Jewish family in Pisa, he moved to Paris as a tennis pro when Italy's racial laws intensified in 1938. When World War II erupted, he joined the Italian Communist Party and returned to Italy to fight. He became a resistance leader in Milan, learning urban guerrilla warfare firsthand, the same tactics he would film decades later. After the war, he worked as a photojournalist before Roberto Rossellini's Paisa inspired him to become a filmmaker. His 1960 film Capot, about a Jewish woman in a Nazi concentration camp, earned an Oscar nomination, but was criticized as melodramatic. So when the Algerian project came, Pontecorvo overcorrected. No melodrama, no sentimentality, just process and consequence. His communist politics informed the film's anti-colonial stance, but his wartime experience gave him the expertise to depict both sides accurately. He knew how insurgents organize, how occupying forces respond, how violence escalates. He had lived in the Kasbah equivalent, Nazi-occupied Milan, and survived. That authenticity is why military organizations trust the film. Pontecorvo isn't guessing. He's remembering. His Jewish identity also adds layers to the film's French torture sequences. He had witnessed Nazi brutality. Watching civilized France employ similar methods against colonized peoples confirmed his belief that fascism isn't an aberration, it's what empires do when threatened. The film is his testimony. He made only 13 features in a 50-year career. The Battle of Algiers is his enduring statement about the machinery of oppression and the cost of resistance. It's personal. Number 4, the film was government-funded propaganda. Here's the contradiction at the heart of the Battle of Algiers. It was financed by the Algerian government through Kasbah Films, explicitly intended to commemorate Algeria's independence struggle based on a memoir by an FLN commander, and promoted as a triumphant revolutionary epic. It was propaganda, and yet Pontecorvo insisted on total artistic control and delivered a film that shows the FLN executing suspected collaborators without trial, depicts their terror bombings killing civilians, including children, and ends with the stark acknowledgement that Algeria's problems didn't end with independence. The film's final title cards note France withdrew, but it took years more of negotiation. Then the final sequence, mass demonstrations in 1960 where Algerians flood the streets demanding freedom. Triumphant. Except Yacef himself later admitted the post-independence period was a disaster. The seeds were already there in 1966. Pontecorvo's film hints at this through its refusal to romanticize the FLN. One revolutionary tells Ali, "It's hard enough to start a revolution, even harder to sustain it, and hardest of all, to win it. But it's only after we win that the real difficulties begin." That line is prophecy. Algeria's government wanted a celebration. Pontecorvo gave them a warning. They didn't listen. The film became a tool for other revolutions, while Algeria itself struggled with the legacy of the violence it had normalized. That's the ultimate irony. Government propaganda that undermines government legitimacy. Only Pontecorvo could pull that off. Number 3, it influenced Spike Lee, Oliver Stone, Catherine Bigelow. The Battle of Algiers influence map is a moral nightmare. In the Criterion Collection release, directors Spike Lee, Mira Nair, Julian Schnabel, Steven Soderbergh, and Oliver Stone all discuss how the film shaped their approach to political cinema. Lee's Malcolm X and 25th Hour owe debts to Pontecorvo's urban geography. Bigelow's The Hurt Locker and Zero Dark 30 inherit the documentary aesthetic. Paul Greengrass's Bloody Sunday and United 93 are spiritual descendants. Anurag Kashyap cited it while making Black Friday about the 1993 Bombay bombings. But the legacy extends into darkness. Counterterrorism experts have speculated that Palestinian groups, Al-Qaeda operatives, and other terrorist organizations studied the film for tactical lessons. The specific techniques depicted care grimly practical. After 9/11, some analysts wondered if the cafe bombing sequence had influenced modern terror tactics. It probably didn't directly, but the concepts were certainly validated on screen. This creates an impossible ethical question. Is Pontecorvo responsible for violence his film may have inspired? He depicted real events accurately. He showed the human cost of those tactics. He didn't endorse them, but he made them comprehensible. Teachable. When Spike Lee says the film taught him how to shoot crowd scenes, that's craft. When Pentagon officials say it taught them counterinsurgency, that's professional development. When someone uses it to learn how to plant bombs, the line between art and instruction evaporates. Pontecorvo died in 2006. He never resolved that contradiction. No one has. Number 2, the French generals who committed the atrocities denied everything for decades. For 40 years after the Battle of Algiers, French military officers denied systematic torture in Algeria. They called Pontecorvo's film slander, propaganda, anti-French fiction. Jacques Massu, whose methods inspired Colonel Mathieu, dismissed the accusations as lies. Marcel Bigard, the tactical genius behind the French victory, threatened lawsuits. Roger Trinquier, who literally wrote the manual Modern Warfare, a French view of counterinsurgency, said torture claims were exaggerated. They maintained this position through the 1970s, 80s, and 90s. Then in 2000, everything collapsed. General Paul Ausarese's published Services Spéciaux, Algérie, 1955 to 1957, a memoir admitting he personally tortured prisoners, ordered extrajudicial executions, and saw murder as routine counterinsurgency work. In 2001, Massu expressed regret to a newspaper, saying torture wasn't necessary and France could have won another way. Suddenly, 40 years after Pontecorvo showed it, the French military's highest ranks admitted, yes, we did all of that. The torture, the disappearances, the summary executions. And no, it wasn't a few bad actors. He had spent decades defending the film's accuracy against official denials. But it confirmed what historians and activists had known. The film wasn't propaganda. It was documentary. The real propaganda was France's decades-long cover-up. And that makes the Pentagon's 2003 screening even more grotesque. They watched a film depicting torture tactics that its practitioners eventually admitted were both horrific and ineffective, then debated whether to use them in Iraq. History repeats as farce. Number one, it was so realistic. People thought they were watching a documentary. The most impressive magic trick in the Battle of Algiers. Nothing you see is real, but all of it is true. Not one frame of newsreel footage, remember? But some sequences are so authentic they might as well be. The crowd scenes in the Kasbah, those are actual Algerian residents of the actual Kasbah, many of whom had participated in real demonstrations against the French. When you see thousands of people flooding the streets, chanting and wailing, those aren't extras receiving direction. They're Algerians remembering what they did in 1960. Pontecorvo didn't stage those scenes so much as trigger them. He created conditions for collective memory to manifest. The locations are real. The Kasbah streets, the prison cells, the checkpoints. The sounds are real. Ululation isn't something you can fake. It requires genuine cultural knowledge. And crucially, the emotional responses are real. When French soldiers rough up prisoners or Algerian women wail over bomb victims, you're not watching acting. You're watching people channel recent trauma. Pontecorvo's genius was recognizing that in 1965, Algeria, the war was still living memory. Everyone on screen had lived through occupation, violence, loss. He didn't need to create authenticity. He just needed to not interfere with it. That's why the film feels like forbidden documentary footage. It's not documentary, but the people in it are documenting themselves, recreating their own recent history with Pontecorvo as witness rather than author. The line between documentary and fiction becomes meaningless when the subjects are reenacting their own lives. At what point does recreation become reality? The Battle of Algiers never answers that question. It just exploits the ambiguity to create something unprecedented, a film that's simultaneously completely staged and entirely real. Bonus fact, the film's legacy is why terrorists still use women bombers. The Battle of Algiers is arguably the single most influential piece of media in normalizing the use of women in terror operations. Before the film, the use of women as suicide bombers or bomb planters was rare. After the film popularized the image of the chic, European-passing Algerian woman crossing checkpoints to deliver violence, the tactic became increasingly common. The film didn't invent the tactic, the FLN did, but it popularized the image. Women are less likely to be searched, less likely to draw suspicion, and society has a built-in reluctance to associate them with extreme violence. The film showed, visually and logically, why this was an effective tactic. The sequence of the three women cutting their hair, changing their clothes, and planting bombs is a masterclass in operational planning. Terror groups understood the visual logic. In the 2 decades after the film's release, the tactic spread globally, used by groups from the IRA to the PLO, and later by LTTE and Boko Haram. The film's critical success was a revolutionary triumph. Its strategic success was a terrorist's manual. That's the darkest twist. A film made as an anti-colonial statement may have inadvertently provided the visual blueprint for one of modern terrorism's most chilling tactics. The film didn't just document history, it shaped the future of violence.